Lord Manticore Training. Problems of the magical path.
People believe that they can obtain magical power or enlightenment by reading a few books, wearing the right robes, and owning a brightly coloured wand. This sort of magical power is supposed to make your life easier, so that if you have any problems, you can wave your wand at them and make them go away. It doesn't work like that, and even if it was possible to reach that level of ability, you are guaranteed shed loads of sorrow and heartache before you reach it. In this video, we'll look at some of the real problems that you'll face on the magical path, which will, at times, make you wonder if it was such a good idea starting in the first place. Now, there's nothing unusual about any of these issues. In fact, they're common to most people who adopt a more mystical life. But few talk about them in case they're forced to face reality or acknowledge the fact that they're not really walking their talk. In the internet age, people expect things at the touch of a button and tend to grow impatient when they do not get the results they want quickly. Magical training takes place over a long period and will require the same lessons repeated often until the student has learned the lesson. There are no shortcuts either. It's like a driving test. Either you reach the level of realization required for the next stage, or you cannot. If you can't, then you have to stay on that lesson until you do. This approach is infuriating to Westerners, but it's much more common in the Eastern path, which, if anything, is much harder. Generally, you'll have to dedicate at least half an hour of your day towards meditation or practical magic. You'll also need to set aside a lot of reading time. You cannot take a day off and do an hour's work the next day. Training works by doing something small every day. The magical path changes you. The early stages of magical work transform your personality. Most of the time, this is to make your personality more you. Unfortunately, this makes you less than what your family, friends, and society want you to be. You might think that the mutually abusive relationship you're involved in when you start the work will hold out, but the fact is, it won't. Issues which have been buried for a long time and neuroses which have remained buried come to the surface to be dealt with. When we looked at cases of students who've left the groups that I've been running, it's usually because they have issues that they don't want to let go of. They are usually triggered by exposures to one or more of the initiation rituals. These are seen as tests of ego or attempts by the lower self to maintain control and preserve the previous patterns that kept it comfortable or enable it to maintain its coping mechanisms. These tests determine whether or not you'll continue in your previous patterns. If you are, then you'll be removed from the magical path until you've sorted yourself out. This often results in you leaving a group, often after a self-created slight or row or having a mental breakdown. A real magician will travel halfway around the world to get an initiation or teaching. They'll drive miles to attend a meeting or receive instructions. It's common amongst modern students to say they're too broke to attend a meeting, yet an analysis of how they spend their money indicates they have it. They're just not willing to choose to spend it on esoteric things, or even things that matter. Crowley once said that he spent 3 inheritances on esoteric matters and would have done it again. Any money he had left over was spent living life. Although I don't have a lot of time for Crowley, I agree. Your partner may not understand. You might have met the partner of your dreams, and they might be understanding about your quaint hobby. But don't expect this to be an area you can share. Some relationships, which are based on both sides having a lot of space, can get away with it, but in many cases, They feel that you should be doing something more important with them. The US occultist Anna Branch once told me that she'd told her husband, "Don't ever make me choose." And that's particularly good advice. But it's a good bet you'll have to choose anyway. Branch said her husband died, so she got out of it. But even relationships between magicians or those with similar beliefs are tricky. You might have experiences that your partner can't get their head around. On the other hand, they may be a bit jealous because you can summon a deemed physical manifestation and they can't. I know of one marriage that ended because one partner was given a high grade and the other was barred. And with all the transformation that goes on in the esoteric path, the person that married you is not going to be the same person that you'd want to be with later on, and vice versa. It's fairly common to say in such a relationship that you have a partner who earths you, who keeps you on the straight and narrow. And some couples really do work like that. But more often that is a form of resentment that builds up over time, that there is a part of you that is forever locked away that they can never understand and never connect to. Now that takes a lot to overcome. As a couple, it is possible, but it's very, very difficult. If you think that's bad, you should consider what happens with ordinary friends. We've mentioned how you will change, but you will always find with friendships there are those who want you to stay the same. Equally, you'll find that those who you call friends will suddenly be bored by you, and you'll find nothing to say to them. Although it's elitist, most of your friends will be interested in sex, sport, television, going on holiday, and their hobbies. Most people don't want to spend any time thinking about something else. They're simply not interested in your experiences. I'd like to say that you will make friendships with people who you share things in common. You might be lucky, but occult friendships sometimes tricky alliances. The deeper you get into this path, you'll find yourself dealing with problems in a completely different way and finding it difficult to sympathize with someone whose football team has just lost an international match and is upset about it. It is sometimes like trying to talk to someone in a different language or living in a universe separate from your own. This takes a big toll on any friendship, especially when they blame your dabbling in the occult for most of your problems. You might be lucky. I kept 2 friends from my childhood and I've had a couple of good occult friends. The days of being a social whirlo are gone, and I'm not really interested in capturing them. When a Gentile wants to become Jewish, the rabbis are required to try and dissuade him. I'm told that there's a similar process for becoming a Roman Catholic. The idea is that only the sincere will make it through the process. But no real magician will want you to convert to his or her path, and your joining is largely meaningless to their spiritual progress. The one thing awards no badges for the number of converts you'll get to follow the path. Indeed, it's almost certain that the path of magic is only for a small number of people. The magical path is an arse full of misery and pain, which is paid for by having experiences which are at times completely bewildering and fantastic. It's a way of life which, terrible though it may be, gives you answers. It teaches you how to know yourself and how to work with yourself, and then to assist yourself's work, and finally merge with that which is beyond yourself. Magic is not something you do on a wet afternoon when there's nothing on television. It takes years to achieve anything. Any decent spiritual path takes time to get results. You might notice some results early on if you join a group. However, the results are often slow and not what you want initially. Take, for example, the Golden Dawn. The first grade adjusts your sphere of sensation so that you can take them, so it can take the magical load. It takes time for you to absorb this psychic surgery. Then there are 4 grades to give you the powers of the elements. It takes time for you to recover from the effects of having these sides of your personality open. If there is a crowning of the spirit, which the candidate is supposed to adjust to the elemental powers within their personality to achieve balance, it takes at least 2.5 years, and that's really optimistic. Then, if you're lucky, you get to train in practical magic at the lesser adept's grade. That can take another 5 years if you work really hard. Then there are the other grades to explore. In other words, you're talking about a lifetime of work. I started in one group and really didn't do much for the first 7 years. And of course, I didn't get anywhere either. I then joined another group where I worked quite intensively for 5 years, and then joined the HOGD and worked quite intensively again, and made reasonable amount of progress. I then, after leaving that, continued on my own path and started to make more significant progress as it became more connected. But this, we're talking years and years and years, and I still can't throw a 1d20 fireball. Anything important is hard to share. My books have all been about sharing ideas that I'd had about various points of occult technology. All this was to a point that I believed that I was sharing my occult discoveries, and I thought that was my job. Instinctively, I still feel that way, but I'm wrong. Realizations are like rainwater on stone. They're harmless until they freeze, crystallize, and shatter the rock that was once their home. I've been working on Greek and Roman magic and theurgy. I was chatting to someone about it, and suddenly I realized that I not only believed something, but I actually lived it. Other occult ideas followed on from this. My instinct was to write about it and share, to detail how I got to that point and what changes it was making. I started putting out some notes and found myself being shouted down by the usual internet clowns. This was par for the course, and I normally expected it, but this time it was different. This occult information was too personal to go through that trial by fire. I didn't want to argue such life-changing magical visions and experiences with those who only wanted to assert their own intellectual superiority. It was not that I thought my ideas were right or better than theirs. They just were, but they didn't need defending. But this meant not sharing occult information, or at least not sharing it with those who'd play those games or want to learn how to get to the same place. There was little chance that those who listened to my description would have been equally excited by it. In fact, intellectually, there was little to it, but there was certainly a reality to it. It would be understandable for someone to say, "You put yourself through all that for that? How does that help humanity?" The answer is, if you have an experience like that, you would know. The whole of the sharing system breaks down because communication fails. It's not because there's a big occult secret. It's because it requires 2 people to meet halfway. Within my own group, there are people where people have worked along similar lines for a while and know where I'm coming from. That's possible. But a general sharing isn't. Someone like me cannot articulate what makes something so important. It's like an emotion, a memory, a color, powered by an image, but it's not something that can be shared. Once you realize there are some occult things which can't be shared, you realize that some of the material that gets you to that place can't be either. Again, it's not because it's a secret, it's because it's irrelevant to those whose spiritual path is not yours. What's the point of finding something important about Homer's Iliad if someone thinks their spiritual path is about summoning a Christian daemon? How important are Greek mantras to those who masturbate on homemade sigils? What use is it to talk about the ever-changing nature of Western magic to someone who shouts that it's all copied from superior Indian spiritual culture? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those paths. They're just like different operating systems between, say, Microsoft and Linux. They're very efficient at processing symbols in their own way, but they don't need your input or even my input. They will find the same realizations in exactly the same way. It's sad, but it's inevitable. That doesn't mean that you can't write or share your experiences with your magical friends. It just means that the ability for you to really communicate your experiences is limited. In the case of writing, you can only communicate a certain number of things. Now, this may take the edge off my real experiences when I'm writing my books, but to a reader, they're still being able to see something, a shadow of what I've really experienced or I'm actually doing. But it is impossible to truly share your experiences like you would sandwiches at school. Earlier we mentioned how psychological problems start to appear within magicians. In fact, the path is famous for turning people into egomaniacs or general nutters. Some of these manifest as a result of the initiatory experiences. For example, the 2-9 in the Golden Dawn tends to make people a bit airheaded and a bit ditzy, particularly if intellect is something that they tend to manifest in their own lives. So if you're dependent on it, it will suddenly become much, much more prominent. In fact, the 2-9 is also famous for bringing out mother issues within certain types of people. If occultists progress without challenging these particular experiences, they ultimately end up as mad as a box of frogs. And pretty soon start claiming that they're a messiah and start to form a new religion based around themselves as a great prophet. If that wasn't bad enough, though, this is a symptom of something bigger that's happening. This is something that is part of your personality, which is desperately trying to prevent you from going any further. I'm talking about your own lower self or lower genius. The lower genius, sometimes called the ego, otherwise called the personality, is formed from the sum total of everything you have learnt since birth. All the stuff that your parents programmed you to do, society suggested needed to be done, all the things that aren't really connected to your own spirituality that can indeed be changed, are all combined into a single being called your lower self or lower genius. This is not a bad thing. There is a lot of stuff within the East that suggests you should kill your lower genius so that you can allow your higher self to manifest properly. But this is probably not a good idea, because without it, you would be totally vulnerable to everything that you encounter in life. What is better is to make the higher genius less of a threat to you, because the lower genius wants everything to stay the same. It wants everything to be kept within a norm that it understands. Now, magic is a situation which it can't understand because it's new, different, and a bit scary. One example of this is if you actually succeed in experiencing an angelic. The first thing that you go is, oh, there is an angelic, wow, and that's your spiritual reaction to it. But your lower genius has been programmed to refuse to accept the reality of these things. In fact, when you're writing up your diary notes afterwards, your lower self will actually suggest, well, maybe I didn't really see what I was experiencing. And all sorts of things which will try and make it look like you'd never really had a magical experience at all. But one of the dangers of the lower self is it can actually act as a guardian for you to from you to experiencing new and exciting things. As I said, it is completely powerful. It has the power of making you sick, for example. Anything that will keep you from doing work. It will encourage rows with people. All these things which normally you would probably have control of, suddenly your personality is standing in your way. Fortunately, it settles down after a period of time, but not after it's done a considerable amount of damage to your life. And most people don't really expect this to happen. They have entered magic believing that they're going to get a degree of control and power, when in actual fact they find themselves in a period of being completely powerless. This can lead to some people suffering from acute depression. Those who like to over-dramatize this particular being have called it the dweller on the threshold. This comes from a Victorian novel where the hero tries to do a spell and suddenly a evil demon which represents all his fear appears to try and prevent him from entering the mysteries properly. Practically, this is what the lower self is trying to do, only it doesn't have the horns and doesn't smell of goat. But what Butler Lytton got correct was that if you don't properly integrate your lower self into your life, the mere fact that you're trying to hang on to what you've got, the life you have, is going to drive you mad. Most people approach magic with the wrong expectations. They want quick results, visible power, and minimal effort. The reality is that the progress is slow, the work is repetitive, and it demands daily discipline over years more than weeks. As the work deepens, it doesn't just change what you can do, it changes who you are. That process disrupts relationships, exposes buried problems, and often leaves you isolated from the people and life you started with. Very few people are willing to make that trade. And for them, the path offers insight and transformation, but never comfort. That's about it for now. If you liked my video, please don't forget to subscribe. We'll be trying to provide more as time goes on and I master the technology. You might like to put a comment at the bottom. I will try to reply. You also might like to sign up as a subscriber for the Substack, which I'm putting after the address I'm putting after this. Substack is a growing community of people who are seriously working in magic, and the writers include both me, Paola, and others who we rope in as guest writers. It's really growing, and we'd like to see you there. Bye for now.